So we're going to talk about Hiberno-Saxon art and the monasteries as well that created the art that we have from the 7th and 8th centuries in the areas of England, Ireland, and Scotland, basically. So at the same time, there's Anglo-Saxon and Scandinavian warlords. They're amassing artwork dominated by abstracted line and animal motifs. At the same time this is happening, Christian missionaries are establishing monasteries in Northern Europe and sponsoring artworks of Christian content. And that's the Hiberno-Saxon monasteries that we're talking about. The early medieval art of these monasteries differs a lot from the works being produced in Italy and Byzantine at this time in history. The Hiberno-Saxon Christian artworks are very distinctive and are representational of the fusion of the native and the imported artistic traditions. So it's kind of a fusion of those things. In Ireland, they were very isolated, and because of that, their missionaries were set up differently than other parts of the Christian world at the time. Irish monks set up their missionaries in very inhospitable areas so that they could really focus on their spiritual life instead of the materialistic. And the Irish monks set up monasteries not only in Ireland, but in Britain and Scotland as well. And in 563, St. Columba, a famous monk, founded an important monastery on the Scottish island of Iona, where he successfully converted the native Picts to Christianity. The Iona monastery became a major artistic center for the early medieval ages. Art historians call the art of these monasteries Hiberno-Saxon because Hibernia was the Roman name for Ireland, and so that's why it's called Hiberno-Saxon. But art historians also might refer to it as insular art to describe the early medieval art of the Irish English islands. So look out for those two terms, Hiberno-Saxon or insular, kind of mean the same thing. 7th and 8th century early medieval art from Ireland, Scotland, Britain, those kinds of areas, or English islands. So the most distinctive products of the Hiberno-Saxon monasteries were definitely the illuminated Christian books, such as the Book of Kells, which I did talk about really early on in the lecture. And books were so important because they were vehicles in the efforts to Christianize Britain, Scotland, and Ireland. And they brought the word of God to the illiterate. And the illiterate populations really regarded the books they looked at them with awe, really. They didn't understand the language. They were very impressive to these people, even the notion of, they might have even viewed them as magical. So illuminated books are definitely the most important elements of the brilliant artistic culture that flourished in Ireland and Northumbria, which is northern England and southeast Scotland, during the 7th and 8th centuries. So that's really what we're focusing on. The Book of Durrow, we'll talk about the Book of Durrow. It may have been written in the monastery at Iona, which is the same place that the Book of Kells came from. It's at Ireland. Although it's not for certain, they don't know totally where it was made. In the late Middle Ages, they do know that it was in the monastery at Durrow, Ireland, and that's where it got its name, the Book of Durrow, because it was in the monastery in Durrow, Ireland, in the late medieval ages. So the book is very characteristic of insular book illumination. Insular book illumination is famous for full pages devoted to pure embellishment. No text or illustrations, but just pattern and color. And these beautiful decorations that are found in these books show that this ornamentation was really believed to bring status to the book. Just like, when people wear fancy jewelry that's really expensive, it brings status to the wearer. They're thinking that the Book of Durrow really had these carpet pages that are, made basically to elevate the status of the book. And they're purely ornamental, like I said. No text is present. There might be some abstract animals present, but typically just pure and ornamental. They resemble textiles. That's probably why they're called carpet pages. Sometimes featuring highly abstract animal figures, but definitely the carpet pages serve to elevate the status of the book itself. So the Book of Durrow contains these pages where the artist or illuminator enlarge the first letters of an important passage of text and transform those letters into elaborate decorative patterns. This is not an example of that type of page because there's no text on this page. But I'm just telling you the different types of pages that you might find in the Book of Doro, and basically all of these traditions really have no parallels in the classical tradition. So it tells us of the independence that insular artists possess, separate from the classical tradition or the Greco-Roman influence. So the Book of Doro is divided up into 4 sections, each written by a different saint, and it's called the Gospels. There's four Gospels, one for each saint that wrote the section of the Gospel, and each Gospel section has its own carpet page. And each section also has a page with the symbol of the saint that wrote that gospel, and also just an elaborate interlacing design does frame each symbol of each saint, basically. And there's 4 of those for each of the 4 saints that wrote each section of the gospel, basically. And these decorative frames resemble the belt buckle and jewelry that we looked at earlier. These, pages serve to visually highlight the different sections of the book. So we can look at one of these pages where the symbol of Saint Matthew, folio verso from the Book of Duro, possibly from Iona, Scotland, 660-680, ink on tempera on parchment paper. So that's a little bit different. It's not vellum, it's parchment. And the symbol of St. Matthew is a man, and later he adopts wings, but early representations of Matthew do not include wings, but he's a man. And this particular page shows St. Matthew with a frontal head and 2 profile feet, and he wears a cloak of red, yellow, and green with squares. You can see that. Lots of pattern. There he is, and then he's got his profile feet, which is not very classical, so there's really no classical influences here, Greco-Roman classical influences at all. And then all of this is kind of outlined in dark brown or black lines. So the Book of Duro weds the abstraction of Northern European early medieval jewelry with the Christian imagery of Italy and Byzantium. These ideas come to Ireland from the Mediterranean via the illustrated book. So it's kind of interesting that they continue the tradition of the book, but make it a whole new, they take it to a whole new level of craftsmanship, and they really insert their own stamp on it in their own tradition, using their own iconography and their own artistic traditions, such as the, intertwining lines and pattern that was not present in Greco-Roman or early Christian books that probably came over originally. So let's talk about medieval books in a bit more detail. They are especially important to the medieval church, and this is because they helped spread Christianity or the Word of God throughout the world, and the tradition of medieval illuminated manuscripts really started with the Bible, which means the book in Greek. And the Bible consisted of Hebrew scriptures, which were the Old Testament, and then also the New Testament, which is Christian, is in there as well. So the Bible's kind of got the Old Testament and the New Testament. In the late 4th century, St. Jerome produced the Latin or Vulgate, which means vulgar or common tongue version of the Bible. So that was the first time that the Bible was translated into more of a common tongue, which was Latin at the time. And this version incorporates 40 Old and 27 New Testament books. So before the invention of the printing press in the 15th century, all books were handwritten. Bibles were major undertakings. They were very labor-intensive, very expensive to produce. Consequently, few early medieval monasteries possessed a complete Bible because it was just so expensive, so labor-intensive to get the whole Bible. So they typically would just possess like a few sections of the Bible in book form. And so we'll go over some of the common books that would have been made into illuminated manuscripts besides just the Bible. The Pentateuch, contains the 5 books of the Hebrew Torah, beginning with the story of Adam and Eve, which is referred to as Genesis. The Gospels, which means good news, were the New Testament works of the saints Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So those are the 4 guys that wrote the Gospels, and they tell the story of Christ's life, death, and resurrection. The Psalters collect the 150 Psalms of King David, written in Hebrew and translated into Greek and Latin. Other types of books are also out there, and they include lectionaries, which contain passages from the Gospels, but they're reordered to appear in the sequence that priests read them during the Mass throughout the year. There's the breviaries. They include the text required for monks' daily recitations. The sacramentaries incorporate the prayers that priests recite during Mass. The benedictionals contain bishops' blessings. So there's a lot of different kinds of books, and the book for this class does list all of those. And in the later Middle Ages, scribes also created specialized books for the private devotions of the lays people, which are the common folk. And the most popular book was the Book of Hours. And it's called this because it contains prayers that are to be read at specific times of the day. Medieval scribes produced many other types of books. Some ideas about the saints' lives, called the Passionals, and secular texts on history and science, and even some classics of Greco-Roman literature were produced, but these typically contained a lot less illustrations and a lot less decoration than some of the other religious books that were created. So we'll talk about the Lindisfarne Gospel, cross-inscribed carpet page, folio 26 verso, from Northumbria, England, 698 through 721, tempera on vellum. So it's about 1 foot 1.5 inches wide by 9 1/4 tall, I believe. So the marriage between Christian imagery and the animal interlaced style of the Northern warlords is definitely evidenced in this cross-inscribed carpet page from the Lindisfarne Gospels. So this illuminated manuscript was produced in a Northumbrian monastery on Lindisfarne Island, and the book contains several ornamental pages that really exemplify the Hiberno-Saxon tradition of art, really at its best. And like I said, this is a carpet page, so it's basically purely ornamental. And according to a later colophon, which is basically an inscription on the last page of the book that actually provides information regarding a book's manufacture, Eadfrith, Bishop of Lindisfarne, between 698 and 721, wrote the Lindisfarne Gospels for God and St. Cuthbert, whoever St. Cuthbert is. So this carpet page features much more intricate patterning and detail than the ornamental pages of the Book of Durrow. I guess this is much more impressive, the Lindisfarne carpet page. And it has a lot of serpentine interlacements, and animals are devouring each other, writhing, and a lot of elastic shapes. And there's a lot of rhythm and expanding, contracting forms. And it produces this really vivid effect of motion and change. It's very colorful. But it's all kind of held in place by this kind of dominating motif of the inscribed cross. So there's a lot of variety and chaos, but the cross itself is a little bit more solid, and it creates a bit of a base or a bit of stability to the picture, really, along with the frame that contains it, decorative frame around it. There's a lot of variety. It's very maze-like, very complex, and the page really displays the artist's preference for small, infinitely complex and painstaking designs. Let me check and make sure. Okay, we're kind of starting to run out of time, so I will finish this up in the next video.